At 42, Daniel sold everything he owned in Seattle and moved to a small coastal town in Portugal with $38,000 and no plan. 3 years later, he's not rich, he's not poor, but he's also not the person he thought he'd become. If stories about people who left everything behind, not to find paradise, but to find out who they really are, speak to you, subscribe now. This one doesn't end the way you think. Daniel had what most people say they want, a software engineering job at a mid-sized tech company. Salary, $92,000 a year. A one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill with exposed brick and a view of the Space Needle. A gym membership he used twice a week. A retirement account that grew steadily, quietly, like moss on a stone. He was 38 when he realized he couldn't remember the last time he felt anything. Not sadness, not joy, not even boredom. Just nothing. His days followed a script he didn't write but couldn't seem to edit. Wake up at 6:30. Shower. Toast with peanut butter. Commute, 20 minutes. Sit in front of 2 monitors for 9 hours. Lunch at his desk. Usually leftover pasta or a turkey sandwich. Stand-up meetings. Slack messages. Code reviews. Small talk about the weekend. Then home. Microwave dinner. Netflix. Scroll. Sleep. Repeat. On Sundays, he'd meet his college friend Mark for brunch. They'd talk about work. Complain about Seattle rent. Debate whether the Seahawks would make the playoffs. Then they'd go home and prepare for Monday. Daniel had dated on and off. A few relationships that lasted 6 months, maybe 8. They always ended the same way. You're a great guy, but I don't know. Something's missing. He never argued because he knew they were right. He wasn't depressed. He wasn't unhappy, exactly. He was just hollow. At 39, his company offered him a promotion. Senior engineer. $108,000 a year. More responsibility. More meetings. A title that sounded impressive at family gatherings. He accepted. 6 months later, he was standing in the bathroom of his apartment at 2 in the morning, staring at his reflection, and he realized he didn't recognize the person looking back. Not physically. Emotionally, he'd become a function, a role, a set of skills that generated income. But somewhere along the way, the person inside, the one who used to care about things, dream about things, feel things, had disappeared. And nobody noticed, not even him. The catalyst came on a Tuesday. Daniel was scrolling Instagram during lunch, something he did without thinking, when he saw a post from an old college acquaintance named Sophie. She was sitting on a terrace overlooking the ocean, golden hour light, a glass of wine. The caption read, "Year 2 in Lisbon. Still can't believe this is my life." Daniel clicked on her profile. Sophie had been a project manager at Amazon. She'd quit 2 years ago, moved to Portugal, and now worked remotely for a small European startup. Her salary was lower, probably 60,000, he guessed, but her rent was 800 euros a month. Her photos showed her hiking, eating fresh seafood, sitting in parks reading books. She looked light. That night, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He stayed up past midnight researching. Cost of living in Portugal. Remote work visas. Neighborhoods in Lisbon, Porto, smaller coastal towns. Forums full of expats talking about their moves. Financial breakdowns. Reddit threads titled, "I moved to Portugal, and here's what nobody tells you." He made a spreadsheet. His Seattle rent, $2,000 a month. Utilities, internet, parking, another $400. Groceries, $500. Eating out because he was too tired to cook, $600. Gym, $80. Miscellaneous subscriptions and expenses, $300. Total monthly burn, $3,800. $45,600 a year just to exist. In Portugal, he could rent a 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony and ocean view for 900 euros. About $1,000. Utilities, $100. Food, $300 if he cooked. Public transport, $40. Total, $1,400 a month. Less than $17,000 a year. The difference, $28,600 saved annually. Over 5 years, That was $143,000. He stared at the numbers. Then he closed his laptop and went to bed. But the idea didn't leave him. Daniel spent the next 3 months in a state of quiet obsession. He didn't tell anyone. Not Mark. Not his parents. Not his co-workers. He just researched. He watched YouTube videos of Americans living abroad. He read blog posts about culture shock. He joined Facebook groups for digital nomads and expats. He learned about the D7 visa, which allowed non-EU citizens to live in Portugal if they could prove passive or remote income. His savings, $38,000. His job, remote eligible if he asked. He drafted the email to his boss 17 times before sending it. Subject, remote work request. Hi, Jennifer. I'd like to discuss the possibility of transitioning to full-time remote work. I've been with the company for 6 years, and I believe I can maintain, if not exceed, my current productivity while working from a different time zone. Happy to discuss logistics. Her response came 3 hours later. Let's talk. The conversation was short. She asked why. He said he wanted a change of scenery, more flexibility, a chance to travel. She said she needed to talk to HR, but she didn't see why not, especially since half the team was already remote post-pandemic. 2 weeks later, it was approved. That's when Daniel realized there was nothing stopping him, except himself. He told Mark first. They were sitting at their usual brunch spot. Mark ordered the Benedict. Daniel ordered coffee and said, I'm thinking about moving to Portugal. Mark laughed. Like, for vacation? No, like moving. For a year, maybe longer. The laugh faded. Wait, you're serious? Yeah. Mark put down his fork. Dude, why? Daniel tried to explain. The cost of living. The burnout. The feeling that life was happening to him instead of being something he chose. Mark listened. Then he said, That's running away, man. You're not going to find whatever you're looking for by just leaving. Daniel didn't argue, because part of him wondered if Mark was right. His parents were worse. His mom cried. His dad asked if he was having some kind of breakdown. They reminded him of his retirement account, his health insurance, his career trajectory. They said Seattle was expensive, sure, but it was safe. It was home. What if it doesn't work? His mom asked. Daniel didn't have an answer, but 3 months later, he booked a one-way ticket to Lisbon. Daniel landed in Lisbon on a Sunday in October. The city was warm. The light was softer than Seattle. The streets smelled like salt and fresh bread. He'd rented an Airbnb for 2 weeks while he searched for an apartment. It was in Alfama, the old neighborhood, with narrow cobblestone streets and laundry hanging from balconies. His window overlooked a small square where old men played cards in the afternoons. For the first 3 days, he felt like he was on vacation. He walked everywhere, ate pastel de nata from corner bakeries, rode the iconic yellow trams, sat in parks and watched people. He video called his parents and said, I'm fine, everything's fine. But by the second week, the honeymoon feeling started to crack. He didn't speak Portuguese. Ordering coffee felt like a small humiliation. He smiled and pointed at menus like a child. He worked Seattle hours, which meant starting at 5 p.m. Lisbon time and finishing near midnight. It kept him connected to his team, but disconnected from the city. By the time he logged off, restaurants were closed. The streets were empty. He'd go to bed and wake up in the early afternoon, groggy and disoriented. He found an apartment in Campo de Rique, a one-bedroom with high ceilings, wooden floors, and a small balcony. Rent, €850 a month. He signed a lease and moved in. For a while, it felt like progress. He bought groceries, learned how to say obrigado and por favor. He joined a co-working space to meet people, but most days he worked from home because it was easier. On weekends, he explored. He took day trips to Sintra, Cascais, the beaches south of Lisbon. He ate alone at small restaurants and felt conspicuous, like everyone could tell he didn't belong. He texted Mark photos, got thumbs-up emojis in return. He called his parents once a week. They asked the same questions. Are you eating enough? Have you made friends? When are you coming home? He said he was fine. But the truth was harder to explain. He wasn't miserable. He wasn't lost. But he also wasn't anything. He'd moved 4,000 miles, and somehow he still felt exactly the same. Month 3 was when the loneliness started to feel physical. Daniel had acquaintances, people from the co-working space, other expats he'd met at meetups, but no real friends. Conversation stayed surface level. Where are you from? How long have you been here? Oh, cool. Nobody asked what kept him up at night. Nobody knew his last name. Back in Seattle, he'd had Mark. They'd known each other for 15 years. Mark knew Daniel's college stories, his failed relationships, his parents' quirks. They didn't talk about feelings, but they didn't have to. The history did the talking. Here, Daniel was starting from zero. And it turned out making friends as an adult in a foreign country was harder than he thought. He tried. He went to language exchange meetups. He joined a running group. He even signed up for a pottery class, thinking maybe structured activities would help. But every interaction felt like an audition. Everyone was friendly, but nobody was close. He'd come home to his quiet apartment, heat up leftovers, and sit on the balcony with a beer, watching the street below. And he'd think, what am I doing here? The cost of living was lower. Yes, he was saving money. But for what? He wasn't traveling. He wasn't learning Portuguese beyond basic phrases. He wasn't building a new life. He was just existing in a different place. One night, he video called Mark. How's it going, man? Mark asked. Daniel hesitated. It's fine. You don't sound fine. I don't know. It's just different than I thought. Mark was quiet for a moment. You can always come back, you know. Daniel nodded, but the thought of going back felt like admitting failure. So he stayed. The shift came in month 7. Daniel had stopped trying so hard. He'd accepted that he wasn't going to make 10 new best friends. He wasn't going to become fluent in Portuguese overnight. He wasn't going to transform into a different person just because he changed his zip code. He started doing things for himself, not for the story he thought he was supposed to be living. He found a small cafe near his apartment that opened early. The owner, a woman in her 60s named Teresa, made the best coffee he'd ever tasted. She didn't speak English. He didn't speak Portuguese. But every morning he'd come in and she'd smile and say, "Oh, mesmo?" The same? And he'd nod. It became a ritual, a small, quiet anchor. He stopped working Seattle hours. He told his boss he needed to shift to European time for his mental health. She agreed. Suddenly, his evenings were free. He started walking after work, not with a destination, just walking through Barro Alto, along the river, up to the Miraduros, the viewpoint scattered across the city's hills. One evening, he ended up at a small bar in Graca. It was a local spot, not touristy. Just a few tables, a bartender, and a group of Portuguese guys watching a football match. Daniel ordered a beer. The bartender, mid-30s, friendly, asked in broken English where he was from. "Seattle," Daniel said. "Ah, rain, yes?" Daniel smiled. "Yes, a lot of rain." They talked for a few minutes. Then the bartender introduced him to the guys watching the match. They didn't speak much English, but they made space for him at the table, poured him another beer, and shouted at the TV together. Daniel didn't understand half of what was happening, but he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Connection. He started going back to that bar once a week, then twice. The guys got used to him. They'd wave when he walked in. One of them, João, spoke decent English and started teaching him Portuguese slang. It wasn't a deep friendship, but it was real, and slowly, the city started to feel less foreign. By the end of his first year, Daniel had saved $27,000. He'd traveled more than he ever had. Weekends in Porto, a week in the Algarve, a train trip to Spain. He'd learned to cook Portuguese dishes. He could hold basic conversations in Portuguese. He had a routine, a rhythm, a handful of people who knew his name. He wasn't living some Instagram dream life, but he also wasn't numb anymore. One afternoon, he was walking along the river when his phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Dude, remember Sophie? The girl who moved to Lisbon? She's back in Seattle. said it wasn't for her. Daniel stared at the message. Sophie, the person whose post had started all of this, was back. He didn't know how to feel about that. He called her. They met for a virtual coffee. She looked tired. "Why'd you come back?" he asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. I thought moving would fix things. But I was still me, you know? Same insecurities. Same patterns. Just in a prettier place." Daniel nodded. "Do you regret it?" She thought about it. "No. I needed to try. But I also needed to realize that running doesn't solve anything. You have to do the work, wherever you are." After the call, Daniel sat on his balcony for a long time. He thought about what she said, and he realized she was right. Moving hadn't fixed him. It hadn't made him a different person, but it had given him space. Space to stop running on autopilot. Space to figure out what he actually wanted, instead of what he was supposed to want. Daniel is still in Portugal. It's been 3 years now. He makes the same salary, works the same job, lives in the same apartment. But he's different, not because Portugal changed him, but because leaving forced him to confront the parts of himself he'd been ignoring. He's learned that loneliness isn't geography. It's a lack of connection, and connection takes effort, no matter where you are. He's learned that freedom isn't just about money or location. It's about making choices that feel like yours. He still eats dinner alone most nights, but now it feels like a choice, not a sentence. He video calls his parents every Sunday. They've stopped asking when he's coming home. They've started asking about his life instead. Mark visited last year. They spent a week exploring Lisbon together. On the last night, sitting at that bar in Graca, Mark said, "You seem lighter." Daniel smiled. "Yeah, I think I am." He doesn't know if he'll stay in Portugal forever. But for now, he's not running anymore. He's just living. And that, it turns out, was the whole point. Some people leave to find themselves. Some people leave to escape. Daniel left not knowing which one he was doing. And maybe that's the most honest way to make a bold leap, not with certainty, but with curiosity. If this story made you think about the choices you're not making, subscribe and share it with someone standing at the edge of their own decision. Because sometimes the leap doesn't give you answers. It just gives you the space to ask better questions.